The rhythmic beeping of monitors and the distant chatter of nurses filled the air as Emily Carter rushed through the hospital corridor. It was another long shift in the emergency department, but she loved her job. Helping people made every exhausting hour worth it. She checked the chart in her hands, room 304. A new patient, admitted overnight. Emily took a deep breath, smoothed her scrubs, and stepped inside. A man lay in the hospital bed, his face partially obscured by the dim lighting. His posture was relaxed, but there was an undeniable air of authority about him. His eyes, sharp yet unreadable, flickered to Emily as she entered. "Good morning, sir," she greeted with a warm smile. "How are you feeling today?" Before the patient could answer, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Nurse Carter," Dr. Ethan Reynolds strode in, his white coat billowing behind him. The moment Emily saw him, her stomach clenched. Dr. Reynolds was brilliant, but he was also ruthless. He had a habit of making examples out of people, and today, she was his target. "Did you even read the patient's file before barging in here?" he snapped, snatching the chart from her hands. Emily's face burned. I was just about to check," Dr. Reynolds let out a scoff, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. Maybe if you paid more attention, you wouldn't be wasting everyone's time." Silence hung in the room. The patient, still watching, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Emily swallowed hard. She had seen Dr. Reynolds humiliate nurses before, but being on the receiving end felt like a punch to the gut. The worst part? The patient had witnessed it all. She bit her lip and looked away, unaware that the man in the bed was far more than just another patient. And soon, everyone, including Dr. Reynolds, would realize just how big of a mistake he had made. Emily forced herself to stay composed. Years of working in the ER had trained her to keep her emotions in check, but this, being humiliated in front of a patient, felt different. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck, but she refused to let Dr. Reynolds see her break. "Do you even understand the importance of reading a patient's history before administering care?" Dr. Reynolds continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is basic protocol, Nurse Carter. If you can't handle that, maybe you're in the wrong profession." Emily clenched her fists. She wanted to fight back, to defend herself, but she knew how it worked. Talking back to Dr. Reynolds was like signing your own death warrant in this hospital. She had seen what happened to others who dared to stand up to him. Suddenly, their shifts got longer, their requests ignored, their careers stalled. So she did the only thing she could do. She nodded. "Understood. Dr. Reynolds smirked, clearly satisfied with himself. He turned back to the patient, flipping through the chart. "As for you, Mr. Willis, it's Carter." Both Emily and Dr. Reynolds turned to the patient, startled. It was the first time he had spoken since the doctor entered. His voice was deep, controlled, yet laced with something that sent a chill down Emily's spine. Dr. Reynolds frowned. "Excuse me," the man sat up slightly in bed, his sharp eyes meeting the doctor's. "My name isn't Willis," he said. "It's Carter. Lucas Carter." Emily's breath hitched. Carter? Something about the name felt familiar, but she couldn't place it. Dr. Reynolds, however, looked unfazed. "Regardless, Mr. Carter, you were admitted last night with," but Lucas Carter held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I think I've heard enough for today." His gaze flickered to Emily, then back to Dr. Reynolds. "I don't appreciate how you speak to your staff." The room fell silent. For the first time, Dr. Reynolds hesitated. I was simply ensuring proper protocol was followed," he said, his tone losing its usual arrogance. Lucas Carter smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sure you were." He leaned back against his pillow, eyes closing. "We'll talk later, doctor." Emily caught the way Dr. Reynolds stiffened before he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. As soon as the door shut, Lucas exhaled slowly, then turned his head toward Emily. "You okay?" he asked. Emily blinked. No patient had ever asked her that before. She forced a small smile. "Yeah. I'm used to it." Lucas studied her for a moment, then murmured, "You shouldn't be." Emily didn't know what to say. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And for the first time since she walked into that room, she felt that this man, this patient, was far more important than anyone realized. And soon, Dr. Reynolds would regret ever crossing him. Emily left room 304 feeling a strange mix of emotions. Embarrassment still burned in her chest. But Lucas Carter's words echoed in her mind. You shouldn't be. Why did it feel like he knew something she didn't? She made her way to the nurse's station, where her colleague and best friend, Megan, was organizing patient files. The moment Megan saw Emily's face, she frowned. Oh no, what happened? Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. Dr. Reynolds happened. Megan groaned. What did he do this time? Emily gave a brief rundown of the humiliating scene in room 304. Megan's expression darkened. That man is a nightmare. I swear, if he wasn't so protected by the board, half the hospital would rally to get him fired. Emily leaned against the counter. It was bad this time. Megan. The patient, Lucas Carter, he was there. He saw everything. At the mention of the name, Megan froze. Emily noticed immediately. What? Megan's eyes widened. Wait. Lucas Carter. She grabbed her tablet and quickly typed something in. A few seconds later, she turned the screen toward Emily. Emily's stomach dropped. Staring back at her was a news article with the headline, Billionaire CEO Lucas Carter hospitalized in secret, reason unknown. Her breath caught in her throat. Billionaire? CEO? Megan scrolled down. Lucas Carter owns Carter Global Industries. Real estate, tech, healthcare, you name it. His company has major investments in hospitals all over the country. She shot Emily a look. Including ours. Emily's mind raced. No wonder there was something commanding about him. He wasn't just some patient, he was one of the most powerful men in the country. And Dr. Reynolds had just humiliated a nurse in front of him. Megan exhaled in disbelief. Reynolds is screwed. Emily wasn't so sure. Lucas Carter had remained calm through it all. Would he even care enough to do something? But deep down, something told her this wasn't over. And she was right. Because within the next 24 hours, everything was about to change. The hospital bustled with its usual chaos, patients being wheeled in, nurses rushing between rooms, and doctors barking orders. But for Emily, everything felt different now. Lucas Carter wasn't just another patient. He was one of the most powerful men in the country, and she had unknowingly been caught in the middle of something much bigger than herself. She tried to shake off the unease as she focused on her next round of patient checks. But before she could move, Megan grabbed her arm. You think he's going to do something? Megan whispered. Emily hesitated. I don't know. He didn't seem angry. Just observant, Megan smirked. That's worse. The powerful ones don't yell. They take action, Emily forced a laugh. Well, whatever happens, I just hope I'm not in the middle of it, but fate had other plans. As Emily walked down the hall, a voice called out behind her. Nurse Carter. She turned to see Dr. Reynolds striding toward her, his usual smug expression replaced by something sharper, unease. You've been reassigned, he said abruptly, thrusting a slip of paper into her hands. Emily frowned, unfolding the paper. Patient 304, primary nurse, Emily Carter, her heart skipped. Wait. You're putting me on Lucas Carter's case, Dr. Reynolds crossed his arms. The patient personally requested you, Emily's eyes widened. But why? Reynolds' jaw tightened. No idea. But let me be clear, you're still expected to follow orders. You don't answer to him. You answer to me. Something in his voice was off. For the first time, it sounded like he was nervous. Emily straightened her back, meeting his gaze. Understood, doctor, but as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Lucas Carter wasn't done. And whatever he had planned, Dr. Reynolds wouldn't see it coming. Emily took a deep breath before stepping into room 304. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing, Lucas Carter had specifically requested her. As she entered, she found him sitting up in bed, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up, a faint smirk on his lips. Ah, Nurse Carter, he said smoothly. Looks like we'll be seeing a lot of each other. Emily tried to keep her composure. It looks that way. Is there anything I can do for you, Mr. Carter, Lucas, he corrected. And yes. I need a few things, Emily pulled out her notepad. Of course. What do you need? Lucas set his phone aside and studied her, his sharp gaze making her shift uncomfortably. First, I'd like my medical records for the past 24 hours. Second, I'd like a list of all attending physicians assigned to me, Emily hesitated. That's an unusual request. Lucas chuckled. So is a billionaire choosing to stay in a public hospital instead of a private one, Emily blinked. Then why are you here? Lucas leaned forward slightly. Let's just say. I like seeing how things really work, something in his tone sent a chill down her spine. She swallowed. All right. I'll get those records for you. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Oh, and Emily, she turned back. You don't deserve to be treated the way Reynolds treats you, he said casually. I don't forget things like that, Emily's pulse quickened. She didn't know exactly what Lucas Carter was planning. But she knew one thing for sure, Dr. Reynolds was in trouble. Emily hurried down the hallway, gripping the notepad tightly. Lucas Carter's words played over in her mind. I don't forget things like that, it wasn't just a comment. It was a promise. By the time she reached the records office, a strange tension had settled in her chest. If Lucas was planning something, she wasn't sure she wanted to be caught in the crossfire. As she gathered the files he requested, Megan appeared beside her. Okay, spill. What did he want? Emily lowered her voice. His medical records and a list of every doctor who's treated him. Megan's eyes widened. Oh, he's up to something. And I bet Reynolds is at the top of his list, Emily sighed. I don't want to get involved. Megan smirked. Too late. You already are, Emily bit her lip. She couldn't argue with that. That afternoon, as she returned to Lucas' room, Dr. Reynolds stormed past her, his face red with anger. Emily barely had time to step aside before he barked, "Stay out of things you don't understand, Nurse Carter," then he was gone. Heart pounding, she entered the room. Lucas sat in his hospital bed, flipping through his file. He glanced up at her with a calm smile. You work fast, Emily hesitated. What? What did you say to him? Lucas closed the folder and set it on his bedside table. Just a conversation. A friendly one, Emily didn't believe that for a second. She swallowed hard. Lucas. What are you planning? He tilted his head, watching her. Tell me something, Emily. If someone had the power to fix a broken system, wouldn't you want them to use it? She didn't answer. Because deep down, she knew, whatever Lucas Carter was about to do, the hospital would never be the same again. Emily's heart pounded as she stared at Lucas Carter. His words lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. If someone had the power to fix a broken system, wouldn't you want them to use it? She took a careful breath. And by fix, you mean? Lucas smirked. Let's just say, some people in this hospital have gotten too comfortable abusing their power. Emily's stomach twisted. Lucas, please. If you do something drastic, it won't just affect Reynolds. It could impact the whole hospital. The patients, the staff, exactly. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with intensity. Hospitals are meant to heal, not break people down. And from what I've seen, Dr. Reynolds has been doing a lot more breaking than healing. Emily hesitated. She hated the way Reynolds treated people, how he humiliated her, how he belittled nurses like they were disposable. But still. You don't understand how things work here, she said. Doctors like Reynolds have connections. He's protected. Lucas leaned back against his pillows. And I have power. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Before she could say anything else, her pager buzzed. She checked the screen and froze. Code blue, room 212, she looked up sharply. That's Reynolds' patient. Lucas's expression didn't change. Then you should go. Emily turned and ran. By the time she reached room 212, chaos had already erupted. The crash team was working on a patient, a frail, elderly man who was unresponsive. Dr. Reynolds stood at the foot of the bed, barking orders. Emily immediately jumped in to assist, but as she did, she noticed something was off. The medication tray was scattered, and one of the vials was nearly empty. Her pulse quickened. She knew this patient's case. He wasn't supposed to be on that medication. A sinking realization hit her. Someone had made a mistake. And if what she suspected was true, that someone was Dr. Reynolds. As she locked eyes with him across the room, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Fear. And then, for the first time, Dr. Reynolds did something she never expected. He looked away. The room pulsed with tension as the crash team worked to stabilize the patient. Machines beeped erratically, and nurses moved in frantic precision. But Emily's eyes were locked on Dr. Reynolds. He wasn't barking orders anymore. His usual arrogance had faded into something different, something almost like panic. The elderly man on the bed let out a shallow breath as his heart rate steadied. The worst had passed, but the unease in Emily's chest only grew. Dr. Reynolds turned abruptly and stormed out of the room. Emily hesitated for only a second before following him. She caught up with him near the stairwell. "Doctor, wait." Reynolds spun around. "What do you want, Carter?" His voice was sharp, but his usual smugness was gone. Emily took a breath. "That patient wasn't supposed to be on that medication. You know that." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Are you accusing me of something?" Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't want to accuse him. She wanted to understand. But before she could respond, he stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "Be careful, Nurse Carter. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Emily stiffened. "Is that a threat?" He smirked, but there was no humor in his eyes. "It's advice." Then he turned and walked away. Emily stood frozen, her mind racing. Something was very, very wrong. And for the first time, she realized, Lucas Carter wasn't the only one with secrets. Emily's hands trembled as she pressed them against the cool railing of the stairwell. Dr. Reynolds' words echoed in her mind. "Be careful, Nurse Carter. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." She had always known Reynolds was arrogant, but now, for the first time, she sensed fear in his voice. Why? Determined to find out. She headed straight to the records office. If Reynolds had made a mistake with that patient, there would be documentation, something that proved what had really happened. The hospital halls were quieter now, the late shift settling in. Emily slipped into the records room unnoticed, her heart pounding. She pulled up the elderly man's file on the computer. Patient 212, John Anderson. She scanned his chart, her eyes darting over his listed medications. Then she saw it. An unauthorized dosage. Her breath caught. The medication error hadn't been a minor slip-up. It could have killed him. And worse. She clicked on the approval log. Dr. Reynolds' name was right there. Emily swallowed hard. She had the proof. But what could she do with it? As she exited the records office, her mind spinning, she nearly ran straight into Megan. "Geez, Em. You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily hesitated before whispering, "I think Reynolds made a mistake. A big one. And he knows it." Megan's eyes widened. "What kind of mistake?" Emily glanced around before pulling Megan into an empty supply closet. "I found the records. He gave a patient a medication that wasn't prescribed. It almost killed him." Megan sucked in a sharp breath. "That's serious, Em. If administration finds out, that's the thing," Emily interrupted. "Reynolds knows I saw it. And he told me to back off." Megan's expression darkened. "That sounds like a threat," Emily nodded slowly. "I think it was." The two stood in silence for a moment. Then Megan asked the question Emily had been dreading. "What are you going to do?" Emily exhaled shakily. "I don't know, but she did know one thing: Lucas Carter wasn't the only threat in this hospital. Dr. Reynolds was hiding something. And if Emily wasn't careful, she might be next on his list." Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dr. Reynolds' cold stare, heard his veiled warning. "Be careful, Nurse Carter." She had proof of his mistake, but what good was it if she couldn't use it? If she reported him, would the hospital even listen? Or would they protect him, sweeping everything under the rug? The questions haunted her. By the time she arrived at her shift the next morning, exhaustion weighed her down. But something else gnawed at her, a creeping sense of unease. Like someone was watching her. She was heading toward the nurse's station when Megan caught up with her. "Emily, you need to see this." Megan's voice was low, urgent. Emily frowned. "What is it?" Megan glanced around before slipping a piece of paper into her hand. "I found this taped to your locker this morning." Emily unfolded it, her heart hammering as she read the words. "Some mistakes are best forgotten. No name. No signature. Just a warning." Emily felt a chill crawl down her spine. "This is Reynolds, isn't it?" Megan whispered. Emily's mind raced. It had to be. But something didn't sit right. Reynolds was arrogant, sure, but was he this careful? He was the type to threaten someone to their face, not leave cryptic notes. Which meant maybe there was someone else involved. Maybe Reynolds wasn't working alone. Later that evening, Emily found herself outside Lucas Carter's room. She hesitated before stepping in. Lucas glanced up from his laptop, raising an eyebrow. "Nurse Carter. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Emily clenched the note in her fist. "I need to ask you something." Lucas leaned back against the pillows, watching her intently. "Go on," she hesitated. Then, she held up the note. "Did you do this?" For a moment, Lucas said nothing. Then, slowly, he smirked. "Why would I warn you to forget something?" he murmured. "When I want you to remember everything." Emily's breath caught. Then Lucas leaned forward, his expression darkening. "But I will tell you this, Emily, if you're getting threats, you're closer to the truth than you realize." Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Closer to what truth?" she asked. Lucas's smirk faded. His voice was deadly calm. "Reynolds' mistake wasn't an accident." Emily's stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" Lucas met her gaze, unblinking. "I'm saying that someone in this hospital wants that patient dead." Emily's breath hitched. "Someone in this hospital wants that patient dead." The words echoed in her mind, sending a chill down her spine. She stared at Lucas, her fingers tightening around the note. "This isn't just about Reynolds making a mistake, is it?" she whispered. Lucas exhaled slowly. "No, it's not. And if you're smart, you'll stop asking questions." Emily's heart pounded. "I can't just ignore this. If someone's trying to harm a patient, then you've just made yourself a problem," Lucas interrupted. His voice was calm, but his eyes held something deeper, concern. "And problems? They get eliminated." A lump formed in Emily's throat. "Is that another threat?" Lucas shook his head. "It's a warning." Emily stared at him. She didn't trust him, not fully. But there was something unsettling about how serious he looked. "I need to find out the truth," she said firmly. "And if you know something, you should help me." Lucas studied her for a moment before speaking. "If you really want to know the truth, start with Reynolds. He's not as untouchable as he thinks." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Lucas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Every powerful man has a weakness. Find his." Emily swallowed hard. She didn't have time to respond before her pager buzzed again. "Emergency, Dr. Reynolds' office." Her stomach twisted. She turned to Lucas, who smirked. "Looks like the game just got interesting." Without another word, Emily rushed out of the room. As she neared Reynolds' office, she saw a small group of nurses whispering outside the door. The tension was thick in the air. "What happened?" she asked Megan, who stood frozen, her face pale. Megan swallowed. "Dr. Reynolds. He was attacked." Emily's blood ran cold. "What?" She pushed through the crowd, stepping into the office. The sight made her breath hitch. Dr. Reynolds sat slumped in his chair, a deep gash on his forehead, blood staining his white coat. His desk was in disarray, papers scattered across the floor. But what truly made her stomach twist was the message scrawled on the wall behind him. "Stay quiet or you're next." Emily's heart pounded. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare her anymore. They were ready to eliminate anyone who got too close. And now, she was right in their sights. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps as she took in the sight of Dr. Reynolds, injured, blood dripping from his forehead. The message on the wall sent ice through her veins. "Stay quiet or you're next." Whoever had attacked him wasn't just trying to silence him. They were making a statement. Dr. Reynolds groaned, stirring slightly in his chair. Emily rushed forward, instincts taking over. "Doctor, can you hear me?" she asked urgently, checking his pulse. His eyelids fluttered open, and when he saw her, a flicker of something flashed in his eyes. Fear? No, something deeper. Recognition. He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Nurse Carter." His voice was hoarse. "You don't understand." Emily leaned in. "Then help me. Who did this?" His fingers tightened around hers. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, a commotion erupted behind her. 2 security guards rushed in, followed by hospital administrators. "What happened here?" one of the security officers demanded, eyes scanning the scene. Before Emily could speak, Reynolds beat her to it. I fell," he stammered. Emily's eyes widened. He was lying. The administrator, a stern-looking woman in a gray suit, crossed her arms. "Dr. Reynolds, this doesn't look like a simple fall." Reynolds shot Emily a look. One that said stay out of this. She clenched her fists. Why was he protecting whoever did this? The administrator sighed. "We'll be reviewing the security footage. In the meantime, Dr. Reynolds, you need medical attention." Reynolds nodded weakly. As the medics moved in, Emily took a step back, heart pounding. Megan appeared at her side, whispering, "He's covering for someone." Emily nodded. "I know. But why?" Her pager suddenly buzzed. Another emergency. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. Patient 212, code blue. John Anderson. The same patient who had almost died from the medication error. Emily didn't waste another second. She bolted from the room, Megan right behind her. When she reached Anderson's room, the crash team was already inside. Emily pushed through the chaos, heart hammering as she saw the elderly man gasping for breath. His vitals were dropping fast. "What happened?" she demanded. A nurse shook her head. "We don't know. He was stable, and then, suddenly, his heart rate plummeted." Emily's stomach twisted. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was trying to finish what they started. And if she didn't figure out who was behind this soon, more people were going to die. Emily's hands trembled as she helped the crash team stabilize John Anderson. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. "Push 1 milligram of epinephrine, now." Dr. Patel, the attending physician, barked. A nurse rushed to administer the medication while another began chest compressions. Emily's mind was spinning. Anderson had been stable. There was no medical reason for his sudden deterioration, unless someone had interfered. She grabbed the patient's chart, scanning it for any irregularities. Then she saw it. A second dose of the wrong medication. Her stomach dropped. "This isn't right," she muttered, flipping back through the pages. He was supposed to be on the corrected dosage. Who gave him this? A nurse glanced at her, confused. That was the doctor's order. Emily's blood ran cold. "What doctor?" The nurse hesitated. "Dr. Reynolds." Emily felt the room spin. No, Reynolds might have been arrogant. He might have been cruel. But he wasn't stupid. He wouldn't make the same fatal mistake twice. Unless someone forged the order. She turned to Megan, who had just entered the room. "We need to check the electronic logs, now." Megan's eyes widened. "You think someone tampered with it?" Emily didn't answer. She was already moving. As soon as Anderson was stable, Emily and Megan rushed to the nurse's station. Megan quickly accessed the system, typing in Dr. Reynolds' credentials. Emily watched over her shoulder, her heart pounding. "Here," Megan said, pointing to the screen. "The second order for the wrong medication was placed this morning." Emily frowned. But Reynolds never logged in this morning. He was in his office the entire time. They exchanged glances. Someone was setting him up. Emily's fingers flew over the keyboard. Who had access to his account? A list popped up. Her eyes scanned the names, and then she froze. One name stood out. A doctor who had no reason to be prescribing medication for Anderson. Emily's breath hitched. No, it can't be. Megan leaned in. Who is it? Emily swallowed hard, barely able to say the name. Dr. Marcus Holloway. Megan's eyes widened. The head of the department? Emily's heart pounded. Dr. Holloway was one of the most respected doctors in the hospital. He was powerful. Untouchable. But now, he was the prime suspect. And if they were right, they had just uncovered something far bigger than a simple mistake. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the name on the screen. Dr. Marcus Holloway. The head of the department. A man with power, influence, and now, a trail of suspicion leading right to him. Megan swallowed hard. Emily. This isn't just a mistake. This is deliberate. Emily nodded, her mind racing. But why? Why would someone like Holloway want Anderson dead? Before Megan could answer, a voice behind them sent a chill through the air. I'd be very careful where you step, Nurse Carter. Emily turned slowly. Dr. Holloway stood just a few feet away, his gaze cold and calculating. Megan quickly exited the screen, but Holloway's sharp eyes had already seen too much. Digging through medical logs, are we? He took a step closer, his voice eerily calm. That's a dangerous habit. Emily forced herself to stand tall. A patient almost died today. Again. And the same mistake that nearly killed him before was repeated. Except this time. It was intentional. Holloway's lips curled into a small, unreadable smile. Are you accusing me of something, Nurse Carter? She hesitated. This was a man who could end her career with a single phone call. A man with connections. But she had seen the truth. She had proof. And Anderson's life depended on her not backing down. Not accusing, she said carefully. Just curious. Because as far as I can tell, Dr. Reynolds never placed that order. Holloway's smile didn't falter. But his eyes darkened. Do you know what happens to nurses who overstep their boundaries? His voice was soft, but the threat was razor-sharp. Emily's pulse quickened. Do you know what happens to doctors who try to cover up murder? A long silence stretched between them. Then, Holloway chuckled. A brave one, aren't you? He took another step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Let me give you a piece of advice, Nurse Carter. This is a game you don't want to play. Emily met his gaze, refusing to flinch. But inside, she knew, she had just made a dangerous enemy. And if she wasn't careful, she'd be the next target. Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, Dr. Holloway's voice echoed in her mind. This is a game you don't want to play. She had spent years working her way up in the hospital, earning the respect of her colleagues. But now, she had stumbled into something far bigger than she could have imagined. And the worst part? She had no idea why. The next morning, as she entered the hospital, a strange feeling settled in her gut. The usual smiles from fellow nurses felt strained. Conversations hushed when she walked by. Something had changed overnight. Megan rushed up to her, eyes wide. Emily, you need to see this. She handed over a folder. Emily flipped it open, and felt her stomach drop. A formal complaint had been filed against her. Unprofessional conduct. Violation of hospital protocol. Unauthorized access of medical records. Emily's hands shook. Who? Who reported this? Megan hesitated. It was anonymous. Emily clenched her jaw. Holloway. This was his warning. His way of telling her to stay silent. Megan leaned in, voice low. Emily. I think you need to be careful. He has connections. Emily exhaled slowly. Backing down wasn't an option. I need more proof, she whispered. Something that ties him directly to this. Because if we don't stop him now, Megan nodded grimly. More patients could die. A sharp voice interrupted them. Nurse Carter. Emily turned to see Dr. Holloway standing at the nurse's station, his expression unreadable. I need to see you. Now. Emily felt Megan squeeze her hand in silent support before stepping away. She forced herself to breathe, then followed Holloway down the hall. Every step felt heavier. Every instinct screamed that she was walking into a trap. Emily followed Dr. Holloway down the corridor, her heart pounding with every step. She could feel the weight of his presence, the way he walked with unwavering authority. This wasn't just a conversation. This was a power play. He led her into his office and shut the door behind them. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Emily hesitated before lowering herself into the seat. She couldn't show fear. Not now. Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying her like a specimen under a microscope. Then he placed a manila folder in front of her. Her name was written across the top. She swallowed hard. Do you know what this is? He asked, tapping the folder. Emily kept her voice steady. I have a feeling you're about to tell me. A smirk flickered across his lips. This is a detailed report of your misconduct. Your unauthorized access to medical files. Your reckless accusations. And, he flipped a page, his tone turning cold, your failure to follow proper chain of command. Emily clenched her fists beneath the desk. He was framing her. You're trying to silence me, she said evenly. Holloway chuckled. Silence you? No, Nurse Carter. I'm protecting this hospital from reckless staff who overstep their place. Emily leaned forward. Like doctors who alter patient records to cover up their crimes. His smile vanished. A tense silence filled the room. Then, slowly, he stood up and walked around the desk, looming over her. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, he murmured. But let me make one thing clear, you will drop this. Or your career, your entire future, will be over. Emily met his gaze without flinching. You can try to ruin me. But I know the truth. And sooner or later, everyone else will too. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Holloway's face. Just for a second. Then, he leaned down slightly. If you keep pushing, he whispered, you won't just lose your job. You'll regret ever setting foot in this hospital. A chill ran down Emily's spine. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Emily left Dr. Holloway's office with her pulse racing. His threat echoed in her ears, but she refused to let fear take over. She needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that he was behind the tampering. Without it, her word against his would mean nothing. As she reached the nurse's station, Megan was waiting. One look at Emily's face and she whispered, what did he do? Emily exhaled sharply. He's trying to frame me. He has a file on me, full of false accusations. Megan's eyes widened. This is serious, Emily. He's not just covering his tracks, he's making sure you can't expose him. Emily nodded. Which means we're close to something huge. Megan glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. I've been thinking. If Holloway changed the medication orders, there has to be a digital fingerprint somewhere. He's powerful, but he's not untouchable. If we can access the hospital security logs. Emily's heart leaped. We can prove he was the one who altered Anderson's records. Megan gave a hesitant nod. But it won't be easy. Only administrators can access those logs. And guess who has full control over them? Emily gritted her teeth. Holloway. Before Megan could respond, a loud commotion erupted from down the hall. A nurse rushed toward them, panic in her eyes. Room 307. We need a crash cart. Emily's stomach dropped. Room 307, John Anderson's room. She sprinted down the hall, her heart hammering. Inside, doctors and nurses were scrambling around Anderson's bed. His monitors were flatlining. No pulse, a nurse called out. Emily pushed through the chaos. What happened? Dr. Patel, who was leading the code, shook his head. He just crashed out of nowhere. His vitals were stable an hour ago. Emily's gaze darted to the IV bag hanging beside his bed. Her breath caught in her throat. The liquid inside was a different shade than before. Someone had poisoned him. She grabbed Megan's arm, whispering urgently. Holloway just made his next move. Megan's face paled. He's trying to get rid of Anderson, before he wakes up. Emily clenched her fists. She wasn't going to let him win. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the IV bag. The liquid inside was wrong, it wasn't what Anderson was supposed to be receiving. Dr. Patel and the other staff were focused on reviving him, unaware that this wasn't a natural crash, it was sabotage. Emily grabbed Megan's wrist. We need to stop that IV. Now. Megan didn't hesitate. While the team worked to stabilize Anderson, she quickly unclamped the IV line, stopping the flow of the contaminated liquid. Epinephrine. Now. Dr. Patel barked. A nurse rushed forward, injecting the medication into Anderson's IV port. The room held its breath. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, beep. The heart monitor flickered. Then another beep. And another. Emily exhaled in relief as Anderson's heartbeat stabilized. But her relief was short-lived. Dr. Patel turned to her. What the hell happened? Emily hesitated. If she spoke now, in front of everyone, Holloway would find out. He would move faster. She chose her words carefully. Something wasn't right with his IV. Dr. Patel's brows furrowed. He glanced at the bag, then at her. You think this was a medication error? Emily met his gaze. I think it needs to be tested. Immediately. Dr. Patel studied her for a moment, then nodded. Get the bag to the lab. I want a full toxicology report. Megan quickly grabbed a sealed specimen bag, slipping the IV inside. I'll take it myself. Emily watched as Megan hurried off, but the pit in her stomach didn't ease. Holloway knew she was getting too close. And if Anderson was a target, she might be next. Megan disappeared down the hall with the IV bag, moving fast. If they could prove Anderson had been poisoned, Holloway's grip on the hospital would start to unravel. But Emily had no time to breathe. Dr. Patel shot her a sharp look. If you suspect foul play, you need to tell me everything. Emily hesitated. Dr. Patel had always been fair, but was he someone she could trust? Before she could respond, the patient monitor beeped again. Anderson was stirring. His eyelids fluttered before slowly opening, his gaze unfocused. Emily rushed to his side. Mr. Anderson? Can you hear me? A groggy, weak nod. She leaned closer. Do you remember what happened? His lips parted, barely above a whisper. The doctor. He. Emily's breath caught. He was trying to tell her something. Something important. Before he could finish, the door swung open. Dr. Holloway. His expression was unreadable, but his presence sent a wave of dread through Emily's chest. I heard there was an emergency, he said smoothly, stepping into the room. How's our patient? Anderson froze. His eyes widened, flickering with something Emily recognized instantly, fear. That was all the confirmation she needed. Holloway had been involved. And Anderson knew it. Emily turned to block Holloway's path. Standing between him and the patient. He just woke up. We're still assessing his condition. Holloway's gaze flickered between them, and for the first time, Emily thought she saw a sliver of uncertainty in his eyes. Then, he smirked. Well, let's hope for a full recovery. And with that, he turned and walked out. Emily's fists clenched. He knew. And now, the real battle was about to begin. Emily's hands clenched at her sides as Dr. Holloway walked away, his smirk lingering like a shadow in the room. She turned back to Anderson, who was now visibly shaken. His breathing was shallow, his eyes darting toward the door as if afraid Holloway might return. Emily leaned in. Mr. Anderson, I need to know the truth. What happened to you? He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. He changed my medication. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. He thought I wouldn't survive. Emily's blood ran cold. Holloway had tried to silence him, permanently. Just then, Megan rushed back in, breathless. Emily. She held up her phone. The lab results just came in. Emily took the phone, her heart hammering as she read the report. Toxic levels of potassium chloride. Her stomach dropped. He was poisoning him. Megan nodded. And get this, the security logs. Someone with admin privileges accessed Anderson's medical records just before the medication change. Emily's grip tightened on the phone. Holloway. Dr. Patel, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. This is enough evidence to report him to the hospital board. If we move fast, we can stop him before he covers his tracks. Emily turned back to Anderson. Are you willing to testify? Anderson hesitated, but then, his jaw tightened. He nodded. That was all she needed. Hours later, the hospital board meeting, Dr. Holloway sat at the long mahogany table, cool and composed as the hospital board members reviewed the evidence. This is ridiculous, he scoffed. A nurse and an unstable patient accusing me of attempted murder. Where is your proof? Emily took a deep breath and slid the toxicology report across the table. Then, Megan placed her phone down and pressed play. A security recording played, Holloway entering the system, altering Anderson's medical chart. The room fell silent. Holloway's face drained of color. Dr. Patel spoke, his voice firm. Dr. Holloway, you are hereby suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you off the premises. Holloway shot to his feet. You're making a mistake, a voice cut him off. No, the mistake was thinking you wouldn't get caught. Everyone turned. Anderson was standing in the doorway, supported by a nurse. His voice was hoarse, but his eyes burned with quiet victory. Holloway's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Two security guards stepped forward. Doctor, please come with us. Defeated, Holloway had no choice but to comply. A week later, Emily stood outside Anderson's room, smiling as she watched him regain his strength. He had survived. And Holloway? His medical license was under review, with criminal charges pending. Megan nudged her. You did it. Emily exhaled, the weight lifting from her shoulders. We did it. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Peace. As she walked away, she knew one thing for certain, she would never let anyone make her feel small again.